Gun owners continue to wait while more laws are proposed and challenged. How much do major sporting events really impact economies? A preview of Nevada's primary election, the latest unemployment rankings, and state houses debating their impact on taxpayers. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, June 5th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Justices with the U.S. Supreme Court were in conference Thursday, where they met behind closed doors to discuss which cases they'll choose to take up and hear oral arguments on, which cases they'll deny to take up, and which cases they'll put off for another day. An orders list outlining which cases fall into which category is expected Monday. Despite justices ruling several years ago in a gun control case out of New York, providing more guidance on how courts across the country should rule on gun control measures, gun owners across the country continue to face gun control proposals from their state houses. They continue to watch the latest in court cases that have been in the judiciary for years, and they question what to expect from their elected officials heading into an election year. Joining us to discuss this and some of the latest issues is Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield. Kirk, thanks for taking time with us here for the Center Square Daily. Let's start with the U.S. Supreme Court. They've been sitting on a series of cases for months, if not longer in some instances. What's your take on why it's taking so long to address critical issues about the litany of gun control challenges?
Sure. The Supreme Court had a really tough reputation for years. They would often go 10, 15 years between actually addressing gun cases. That's sped up a little bit in the past few years, but still sort of painstakingly slow. And the key is you try to pick a case where you can say something that's going to sort of have the most impact, as opposed to picking one state with a strange law that's not going to apply everywhere. You want to have something that has sort of a common meaning, where you can reach a consensus, at least with the majority. That's tough to evaluate, tough to pick out.
And there's a lot of cases out there that they could possibly consolidate. We're talking cases that range from what kinds of firearms can or cannot be banned, where people can carry such firearms, the ages of people who can purchase certain types of firearms. But while we wait for the justices to actually move on some of those things, there's other lawsuits working throughout the judiciary across the country in the lower parts of the judiciary. Just posted this morning, there's one case out of Florida that seems to be resolving. The Florida Attorney General, James Uthmeyer, he tweeted out that every government office, including mine, exists to protect your God-given rights as enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. That's why we're settling a landmark federal case that declares Florida's 3-day firearm purchase wait period unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. Is this a kind of a rare occurrence where a elected official that's meant to uphold and defend certain laws of a state is saying, you know what? Yeah, we're going to go ahead and drop this case or settle?
In the gun-friendly states, you've seen some of the attorneys general and or governors actually do this. So what there'll been a lawsuit pending. This one was pending since 25, but maybe a lawsuit pending since a prior administration, and then the new administration comes in. Although that's not the case in Florida. Comes in and says, hey, wait a minute, this is a pro-gun issue. We're pro-guns. Why are we opposing this anymore? And announces either a settlement or that they'll no longer appeal or no longer fight the case. And that looks like what the AG has done there in Florida. They've decided to settle the challenge to the 3-day waiting period.
What about some of the, what I guess, you characterized as gun-friendly states? What about those states that are unfriendly to guns?
Right. So they're fighting tooth and nail, right? They're almost all of these challenges are brought by pro-gun groups. And so in the gun unfriendly states, you're never going to get those guys to be on board. And there's really no challenges on the other side, on the contrary. So in the gun unfriendly states, they're fighting them tooth and nail.
Of course, that ruling out of New York several years ago from the U.S. Supreme Court, the NYSRPA v. Bruen case, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case, I mean, that really kind of, in a way, sent shockwaves across the country that we're still seeing play out today. Have some states just not recognized that with some of the laws that they're proposing and advancing?
No, those states are doing what what DC did, almost 20, 30 years ago in the Heller case. Um, Most of these states or jurisdictions don't take it laying down. If they get, a Supreme Court ruling to the contrary, they go back, take a look at the ruling, try to find all the wiggle room, and try to pass new laws that fit within the wiggle room. And that's what's going on all across the country right now.
In Maryland, Governor Wes Moore recently signed a bill banning the sale of certain types of firearms like Glocks that supporters say is a way to try to urge and nudge gun manufacturers to make safer firearms, especially when it comes to whether or not they're easily converted by using a switch. Switches are already illegal. Does this effort in Maryland address the issues of like inner city violence and the use of these switched handguns?
No, that's correct. So that the switch and having a gun with the switch or an auto sear is already illegal under federal law, serious crime. Um, this is more just sort of overkill. But the worst part is it does make simply having a Glock without the switch, without the sear, the most popular handgun in the country, illegal. Glock, in response to California doing this last year, Glock has already announced an entire line of every single one of their current models has been redesigned so as not to accept the switch or the auto sear. So it's having its intended effect.
And Kirk Evans with U.S. Law Shield joining us to discuss the latest lay of the land of firearm legislation and litigation. Maryland doing this, as you mentioned, California's done it, and I think there's still some legal issues taking place in the courts about California's. But Illinois was poised to do that. They didn't get that across the finish line in Illinois, Kirk.
They did not, and you never know what's going on there. They either didn't have the votes, or even someone internally said, this is one of those that's probably going to get reversed if we're suddenly banning the most popular gun in the entire United States. That might get reversed. Let's stick with things that we think we can win.
But again, the as you mentioned, Glock seeming to move towards setting up firearm platforms for handguns that are not going to fit into the category that gun control advocates have of being easily converted from semi-auto to full auto. But another issue in Illinois that we have covered here on the Center Square Daily deals with the firearm owner ID card, which that also has faced legal challenges in the past. There's a fresh federal lawsuit that was filed not too long ago, but the legislators at the state capitol in Illinois, they did pass some changes to that state-issued gun owner ID out of the House. It has not passed the Senate, Kirk. What are your thoughts about this particular piece of legislation, and is it something that kind of highlights there's serious issues when it comes to due process for Illinois' FOID card?
Sure, there are a whole bunch of tough changes. A lot of them sound innocuous, but are frankly rather troubling. The one that sounds innocuous is now, if someone is convicted of a crime, the court clerk is required to report whether or not a firearm involved was stolen. And you think, well, that's good. It seems like something we should tell people if they're bad guys using stolen guns. Well, the kicker is, you can now lose your firearms owner ID card in Illinois if you fail to report a stolen gun, and you can ratchet up severe penalties for multiple failures to report a stolen gun. So the concern is, are we really doing the right thing here, or are we now just going to start tracking down all the people who've been the victim of theft and had their guns stolen?
And the civil liability they could face in Illinois if that firearm is used in some kind of crime. Definitely a question a lot of people in Illinois are watching. But we have other issues like in Virginia. There's an ongoing legal fight, as the Center Square has reported, about background checks. And you've got gun rights groups accusing the state of violating a court order by restarting background checks. It's interesting, back in October, a law was previously found to be unconstitutional as applied to adults age 18 to 20, and they struck it down entirely, but lawmakers came back and passed House Bill 1525. ultimately restoring those background checks. Kirk, there's already background checks done on a federal level, correct? For those who don't understand what it takes to actually go and purchase a firearm, what does that process look like?
Sure. You go into a federal firearms licensee and you have to fill out what's called a 4473. Has a whole bunch of information, and it's a crime, to lie on the 4473. But it asks if you've been convicted of certain crimes or, have mental disabilities, all sorts of things like that. And then you go through what's called a NICS background check, and they run it through. And if they can quickly and immediately determine that you pass the background check, you typically get your gun. If they can't, then there's a waiting period where they get to do, more diligence. And if they don't come back with a negative by a certain amount of time, then you get your gun. Virginia decided, well, not only are we going to make folks go through that, but we're going to do our own background check system, not only at FFLs, but on all firearms transactions, even, giving one to your next door neighbor.
So with that, obviously, the question is, are these, state level background checks on top of federal background checks necessary?
It's more of a headache. Really, the problem is, the real problem is the state or does the state have some info that it's not passing on to the NICS system? Is there something at a local level that maybe we could make for it more efficient? Nobody wants, a multiple convicted felon to, run out and get a gun. Why aren't we getting all that information into the federal system? And, why do we need duplicative things that are just going to delay guns for folks who should have them?
Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield. We've covered a lot of ground here, but to wrap things up, what are some things that gun owners across the country should really have on their radar?
If you're in, what I was call a gun unfriendly state, every year there are new laws that are banning, quote unquote assault weapons, large capacity magazines, and things like that. And they are very, very detailed. Some have grandfathering. The Maryland law doesn't ban let's say the possession of the Glock, just merely the sale or transfer. So you might say, oh, I'll just go out of state and transfer this handgun to someone in another state, and I can get rid of it. You can't do that. You can't sell to a person in another state a handgun. Anyway, my point with all of that is these laws are very, very detailed. There's tons of ins and outs. As they get passed, make sure you know the law, talk to an attorney before you do anything, and try to stay on the right side of the law.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that could take a little bit of research, especially with 50 different states and 50 different laws concerning firearms, some that are very restrictive, others that aren't. But obviously, it's part of the makeup and the fabric of this country, and we'll be watching to see what happens. Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield, greatly appreciate you taking the time here with the Center Square Daily.